December 18, 1944. The dense morning fog of the Black Forest clung like a shroud to the Luftwaffe headquarters in Altenkirchen. Major Klaus von Schroeder's gloved fingers traced the mud-stained leather of a courier's dispatch case, just arrived. Inside, a captured navigation map from the U.S. 8th Air Force, a prize beyond measure promised victory. It laid bare the precise locations of Allied forward fuel depots, the lifeblood of their relentless advance. In his hands, von Schroeder held what he believed was salvation. He did not know he held a meticulously crafted invitation to utter ruin. In the brutal, freezing heart of the Ardennes, a desperate gamble was about to begin. The German war machine, fighting for its very survival, found what seemed to be its ultimate weapon: intelligence that could paralyze the Allied air forces, turning the tide of the entire Western Front. But sometimes the most profound victories are born not from truth, but from a perfectly placed deception. And the consequences can be catastrophic. Before we unravel this incredible chapter of hidden history, tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from today? Now, let us transport you to the chilling dawn of December 1944. The pervasive chill of a German winter morning, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant pine, settled over Altenkirchen on December 18, 1944. A dense, swirling fog, the kind that swallowed sound and blurred the edges of reality, enveloped the Luftwaffe headquarters nestled deep within the Black Forest. It pressed against the frosted panes of Major Klaus von Schroeder's office, muting the already strained activity of the command post. Inside, the air was heavy with the stale aroma of cigar smoke and desperation, a palpable tension born from the brutal deadlock of the Ardennes offensive. 4 days, the weather had shielded the German ground forces, allowing their audacious push to gain a precious, fleeting momentum, but the cost was immense, and the strategic picture remained grim. Major von Schroeder, a man of 34 whose face already carried the etched lines of relentless pressure, stared at the wall map, a sprawling tapestry of battle lines and projections that shifted with every agonizing communique. His uniform, impeccably tailored even amidst the chaos, belied the restless energy that hummed beneath his calm demeanor. As an intelligence officer, his world was one of intercepted whispers, coded messages, and the constant, gnawing uncertainty of war's fog. He craved clarity, a decisive piece of information that could cut through the pervasive gloom. Then a knock, sharp and urgent, cut through the quiet hum of the office. A young courier, his face ruddy from the biting cold and his uniform spattered with fresh mud, stood at attention, a heavy leather satchel clutched in his gloved hand. He presented a folder, its cover still slick with the dark, clinging mud of the Ardennes front. Von Schroeder took it, the leather cool and yielding beneath his touch, a stark contrast to the sterile documents that usually crossed his desk. An immediate, almost primal sense of anticipation tightened his chest. This felt different. He laid the folder on his desk, the lamplight struggling to pierce the gloom of the office, casting long, dancing shadows. With practiced efficiency, he unclasped the buckle and opened it. Inside, protected by a thin oilskin, lay a folded navigation map. The paper, a crisp, pale cream, felt alien and surprisingly resilient. It was clearly of Allied origin, a trophy from the battlefield, still bearing the faint imprint of a pilot's hands. His eyes, keen and accustomed to dissecting complex data, immediately scanned the familiar symbols and markings. U.S. 8th Air Force. His gaze snapped to the bottom corner of the map, where a scrawled annotation identified its source: P-51 Mustang. Shot down near Aachen. December 16th. A jolt of adrenaline surged through him. Aachen. 2 days prior. The second day of the Ardennes offensive. That particular sector had been a cauldron of intense fighting, a pivotal point in the German thrust. A pilot's navigation map, captured intact from such a critical moment, was almost unheard of. Most Allied pilots, rigorously trained in document destruction, would burn or tear such sensitive material before capture. The thought sent a shiver of cold excitement down his spine. This was not merely intelligence, it was a gift. He spread the map carefully across the worn wood of his desk, its folds creasing softly. His fingers traced the intricate lines: flight paths, radio beacons, grid coordinates. But then his breath hitched. Superimposed on the standard navigation data were distinct, circled markings, handwritten in English, identifying specific locations: Fuel Depot Charlie 7, Supply Base Delta 2, Refueling Point Echo 9. Each was accompanied by estimated capacities and operational notes. These were not generic waypoints. These were supposed Allied forward fuel depots, the vital arteries that fed their relentless air superiority. A wave of exultation, pure and potent, washed over Major von Schroeder. His mind raced, calculating the strategic implications with lightning speed. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West, was faltering. The weather, which had been their initial shield, was expected to break, exposing their ground forces to the devastating onslaught of Allied air power. Without fuel, the tanks and trucks would stall, the infantry would be isolated, and the entire offensive would crumble. But with this map was salvation. If the Luftwaffe could cripple these depots, they could ground the Allied air forces, replicate the strategic paralysis of 1940, and create the window their ground forces desperately needed to break through. It was a golden opportunity, a miraculous twist of fate. What von Schroeder, in his moment of triumph, could not know, was the silent, terrifying journey that map had taken to reach his desk. 2 days earlier, First Lieutenant Robert Hendricks, a 23-year-old pilot from the 357th Fighter Group, U.S. 8th Air Force, had been flying escort for a bombing run over the German lines near Aachen. His P-51 Mustang, a sleek, powerful machine that had become the scourge of the Luftwaffe, had taken a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire. The cockpit filled with acrid smoke, the controls stiffened, and Hendricks fought a desperate, losing battle against gravity and a rapidly failing engine. He ejected, tumbling through the freezing air, the burning wreckage of his aircraft spiraling away below him. He landed hard in a snow-covered field, his parachute snagged on a skeletal tree. Dazed, disoriented, and nursing a broken arm, his first thought was the map in his flight suit's internal pocket. He fumbled for it, his fingers stiff and numb, but before he could even begin to tear the paper, the guttural shouts of German voices echoed through the misty woods. A patrol from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, drawn by the crash, swarmed him. Resistance was futile. The map, still pristine, remained in his possession as he was roughly pulled to his feet and marched into captivity, a silent, unwitting pawn in a game far larger than himself. He had carried it with the genuine belief it held his true navigation coordinates, a small, carefully designed lie. Back in Altenkirchen, the captured map quickly escalated through the command structure. The German High Command, consumed by a desperate hunt for any tactical advantage to bolster their faltering Ardennes offensive, seized upon it with an almost manic intensity. The intelligence seemed too perfect, too timely to be anything but genuine. The stakes were astronomical. If they could deny the Allies their fuel, they could truly turn the tide. The news reached Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the obese and increasingly erratic commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, at his opulent but isolated retreat. At 51, Göring was a shadow of his former self, his mind clouded by morphine and delusion, his grasp on operational reality tenuous at best. Yet, the proposal for a massive coordinated strike based on these captured coordinates ignited a flicker of his old, grandiose ambition. A decisive blow against the Allied air arm, a crippling strike that would echo the glory days of the Blitzkrieg. It was precisely the kind of bold, high-stakes gamble that appealed to his distorted vision of victory. He approved it personally with an urgency that brooked no delay. Operation Walkürenritt, Ride of the Valkyries, was born. Its objective, to unleash the Luftwaffe's remaining strength against these supposedly vulnerable fuel depots, shattering the Allied logistical backbone. The captured map, clutched in von Schroeder's eager hands, had sealed the fate of hundreds of German aviators, sending them towards a confrontation meticulously orchestrated by an unseen enemy. A wave of false hope, seductive and deadly, had swept through the German High Command, propelled by a document that promised salvation but concealed an inescapable doom. The stage was set for a catastrophe cloaked in the guise of opportunity. The triumphant atmosphere that settled over the German High Command, stretching its illusory warmth even to the chilly depths of Altenkirchen, was a dangerous mirage. Major Klaus von Schroeder, riding the crest of exhilaration from his discovery, was already drafting preliminary orders, his mind aflame with the possibilities this captured map presented. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, cloistered in his isolated retreat, allowed the news to briefly pierce his morphine-induced fog, nodding with the detached satisfaction of a man convinced he was orchestrating destiny. They saw a golden opportunity, a direct line to the Allies' jugular. Yet, with every jubilant pronouncement, every strategic discussion, they drew themselves deeper into a meticulously constructed web of deceit, spun by an unseen enemy far from the freezing forests of the Ardennes. What von Schroeder and his eager superiors could not comprehend was the sheer scale and chilling precision of the trap they were so eagerly embracing. This was no mere stroke of luck, no fortunate intelligence coup. This was the culmination of Operation Quicksilver II, an elaborate, insidious campaign of disinformation orchestrated since October 1944 by the London Controlling Section and the American Counterintelligence Corps. Its origins lay in the brutal lessons learned from earlier, simpler deceptions, and its execution was a testament to the Allies' growing mastery of psychological warfare. In the understated, often drab offices of Whitehall, far from the roar of engines and the crash of artillery, the architects of Quicksilver II operated in a world of whispers and meticulously forged realities. Colonel John Bevan, the taciturn head of the London Controlling Section, a man whose intellectual rigor was matched only by his profound anonymity, oversaw the operation. His team, a collection of linguists, cartographers, psychologists, and former actors, worked in quiet intensity. They were the unseen puppeteers, pulling the strings of an enemy they understood with unsettling intimacy. Their analysis of German intelligence, gleaned from ultra-intercepts and agent reports, had revealed a desperate, almost ravenous hunger for actionable intelligence. As the war tightened its grip on the Third Reich, the German High Command was increasingly susceptible to grand, tempting illusions. The Allied strategists had learned much from their previous deceptions, particularly the elaborate ruses that had paved the way for D-Day. Those had been broad, sweeping campaigns, designed to misdirect entire armies. Quicksilver II, however, was a refinement, a subtle art of targeted misdirection. They had recognized a critical vulnerability: fighter pilots. Unlike bomber crews or high-ranking staff officers, fighter pilots, if captured, were considered by German intelligence to be low-value targets for strategic interrogation. Their primary role was combat, not grand strategy. Their navigation maps, while vital for their individual missions, were perceived as tactical tools, not blueprints for entire campaigns. This psychological blind spot became the foundation of the Allied plan. The process began in a secure facility tucked away in rural England, where a special unit was tasked with the creation of the false documents. These weren't crude forgeries, they were masterpieces of illusion. Every detail was meticulously recreated: the texture of the paper, the specific weight of the cardstock used for map overlays, the exact hue of the ink, the standardized symbols of the U.S. 8th Air Force. Even the faint, almost imperceptible scent of the map's chemicals was replicated to ensure it matched genuine Allied documents. Former German intelligence officers, now working covertly for the Allies, provided invaluable insight into the nuances of what their former colleagues would look for, and what they would dismiss. They understood the German obsession with order and detail, and how that very obsession could be exploited. Once the physical maps were flawless, the crucial layer of deception was added. 23 separate navigation charts were produced, each intended for a different P-51 Mustang or P-47 Thunderbolt squadron. On each of these maps, amidst the genuine waypoints and radio frequencies, were carefully circled and annotated locations. These were the critical fuel depots, hand-drawn with a pilot's slightly hurried script, bearing realistic-sounding names like Fuel Depot Charlie 7 near Liège, Supply Base Delta 2 at Maastricht, and Refueling Point Echo 9 near Spa. The estimated capacities, the logistical codes, all were fabrications designed to tantalize and convince. The chilling truth was that these depots were, in reality, massive concentrations of anti-aircraft artillery, painstakingly deployed and camouflaged in the weeks leading up to the Ardennes offensive. Under the relentless, driving rain and the heavy, concealing fogs of late autumn, Allied engineers and anti-aircraft crews had worked in shifts, digging in hundreds of Bofors 40mm cannons, M190mm guns, and the formidable British QF 3.7-inch anti-aircraft pieces. These batteries were positioned in precise, overlapping kill zones, designed to create an inescapable cone of fire for any aircraft foolish enough to enter. They were silent, deadly guardians, awaiting an enemy lured by the promise of easy prey. The sheer logistical effort to move and conceal so much firepower was immense, a calculated gamble that relied entirely on the success of Quicksilver II. First Lieutenant Robert Hendricks, 23 years old, vibrant and full of the nervous energy that defined a combat pilot, was one of the unwitting carriers of this manufactured doom. On the morning of December 16, 1944, before his fateful escort mission near Aachen, he had clipped his assigned navigation map into the kneeboard of his P-51 Mustang. He'd studied it, memorizing the routes and, crucially, the circled depots that he believed represented vital Allied infrastructure. To him, they were genuine, a testament to the relentless push of his forces. He flew with a sense of purpose, of duty, unaware that the very document he relied upon was a poisoned chalice, not for him, but for those who would eventually capture it. His desperate struggle after his P-51 was hit, His fumbled attempts to destroy his documents as German voices closed in, were not failures in the eyes of Allied intelligence. They were, in fact, perfect outcomes. His capture, the intact map, its journey through the chain of German command, every step confirmed the successful execution of Quicksilver II. The meticulous planning, the years of intelligence gathering, the hundreds of man-hours spent forging documents and positioning artillery, had hinged on moments like these. As the German High Command celebrated their victory of intelligence, and feverishly began to plan Operation Walkürenritt, a quiet, almost grim satisfaction settled over the Allied intelligence officers. They knew the cost of war, the human price of every deception. But they also understood that this was a war for survival, and information, when wielded correctly, could be as lethal as any bomb. The irony was almost unbearable. The false hope blooming within the Luftwaffe was carefully nurtured by the very individuals they sought to destroy. The stage was not merely set for a battle. It was set for a slaughter, born from a lie so compelling, so perfectly placed, that it would lead an entire air force to its own destruction. The captured map, now reverently dubbed the Phoenix document by Major Klaus von Schroeder, ignited a frantic, almost feverish energy within the beleaguered Luftwaffe command. The initial euphoria gave way to a relentless, round-the-clock preparation for Operation Walkürenritt. Every available resource, every spare man, every precious drop of fuel was diverted to this single desperate gamble. The stakes were astronomical, the very survival of the Ardennes offensive, and perhaps a sliver of Germany's fading hope, rested on its success. Across a network of airfields spanning western Germany, Münster, Rhein, Handorf, and numerous smaller, camouflage strips, the air crews worked under the pale, weak glow of tactical lighting. Mechanics, their faces grimed with oil and fatigue, toiled tirelessly, coaxing every last ounce of performance from their worn aircraft. Ground crews, shivering in the biting cold, loaded ammunition belts, checked fuel lines, and meticulously cleaned gun barrels. The air crackled with a forced optimism, a brittle hope carefully cultivated by propaganda and the desperate belief in the Phoenix document. The Luftwaffe, a shadow of its former self, was assembling its entire operational might for this single decisive strike. 347 aircraft, a staggering number given Germany's dwindling air power, were assigned to the operation. The bulk of the force consisted of the workhorses of the Western Front. 196 Focke-Wulf FW-190s, sturdy and deadly fighter bombers, and 86 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, agile interceptors now often pressed into ground attack roles. 42 Junkers Ju-88s, usually nocturnal bombers or reconnaissance aircraft, were being adapted for daylight fighter bomber operations, their bomb bays now loaded with fragmentation bombs and high-explosive ordnance, their crews unfamiliar with such daring daytime sorties. But the true measure of German desperation, the most telling detail of this colossal gamble, lay in the allocation of the Reich's most precious aerial assets, 23 Messerschmitt Me-262 jets. These sleek, futuristic machines, capable of speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour, were the cutting edge of aviation technology, Hitler's supposed wonder weapon. He had stubbornly insisted on their use as bombers, despite the vehement protests of his fighter commanders. Now, in a startling reversal, 2 full squadrons of these rare, irreplaceable jets were being committed to a ground attack mission, flying as pathfinders and spearheads. Their commitment represented a staggering drain on an already critically depleted resource, a clear signal that this was truly an all-or-nothing endeavor. The fuel allocated for Operation Walkürenritt was an equally terrifying testament to the desperation. 10% of Germany's total aviation fuel reserves on the Western Front, meticulously hoarded and agonizingly scarce, was earmarked for this single, audacious raid. It was a gamble of unprecedented scale, betting the future of the Luftwaffe on a single roll of the dice. If the mission failed, the German Air Force would be grounded for weeks, perhaps months, effectively ending its role in the war. In countless briefing rooms filled with the acrid smell of cheap tobacco and the tension of impending combat, pilots received their orders. Major von Schroeder's captured map, now meticulously redrawn and annotated, was displayed prominently. Squad leaders meticulously transcribed the coordinates: Fuel Depot Charlie 7, Supply Base Delta 2, Refueling Point Echo 9, onto their own navigation charts. The targets were described as lightly defended, vulnerable concentrations of Allied fuel, ripe for destruction. The operational orders were chillingly precise, designed to maximize surprise and penetration. Pilots were instructed to maintain ultra-low altitude flights, skimming the treetops and ridgelines, flying on the deck, to evade Allied radar. Radio silence was absolute, no chatter, no communication, only the internal discipline of formation flying. The attack itself was to be a concentrated hammer blow, waves of aircraft converging on the target simultaneously, overwhelming any potential defenses. It was a strategy born of desperation, relying on speed, surprise, and the sheer audacity of the attack. Among the hundreds of pilots preparing for the mission was Major Gunther Rall, a man whose 32 years had seen him transform from a quiet Swabian farm boy into one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated aces. With 275 confirmed aerial victories, Rall possessed an almost preternatural instinct for combat, an innate understanding of the rhythms and deadly currents of air warfare. He now commanded the 3 Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader 11, leading a formidable force of FW-190s. His crew respected him implicitly, recognizing the quiet authority in his steady gaze and the deep, almost somber wisdom born from years of dodging death. As he checked his FW-190, the Werger, Shrike, with its distinctive yellow nose, Rall felt a familiar tremor of anticipation, but mixed with it was something else, a deep, unsettling uneasiness he couldn't quite articulate. He ran his hand over the worn controls, his eyes scanning the gauges. The mission, as briefed, seemed almost too clean, too straightforward. Allied fuel depots, conveniently clustered, seemingly undefended, revealed by a single, perfectly captured map. Felt too easy. Years of combat had taught him that nothing in war, especially against an enemy as resourceful as the Allies, was ever truly simple. The coordinates, he mused, were convenient enough to be suspicious, a phrase that echoed in his mind like a silent alarm bell. It was an intuition, a sixth sense honed by hundreds of dogfights and near-death experiences, whispering that something was profoundly wrong. But orders were orders, and the desperate hope of the Reich rested on their shoulders. The night of December 22nd bled into the morning of the 23rd. The airfields were alive with the roar of engines, the shouts of ground crews, and the purposeful stride of pilots. The weather, which had been the Allies' protective blanket for a week, began to break. The dense, choking fog that had shrouded the Ardennes for days began to dissipate, replaced by a crisp, clear sky. It was the first morning in a week without the omnipresent mist, a perfect, crystalline winter dawn. For the Germans, it was seen as a sign of divine favor, a clear pathway to victory. For the Allies, watching from their secure intelligence hubs, it was the final, critical piece of their meticulously crafted puzzle falling into place. The stage was now completely set. At exactly 5:43 a.m., the first ghostly silhouettes lifted from the runways around Münster, Rhein, and Handorf. The twin jets of the Me-262s ignited, spewing plumes of orange flame into the pre-dawn darkness, their distinctive, futuristic roar echoing across the frozen landscape. These elite pathfinders, carrying the hopes of a dying empire, surged forward, their incredible speed quickly carrying them to over 700 kilometers per hour, mere meters above the earth. Behind them, a seemingly endless stream of FW-190s, BF-109s, and Ju-88s struggled to maintain their tight, disciplined formations, their piston engines churning, a vast, deadly armada heading west. Major Rall, leading the main force of FW-190s, saw the Me-262s disappear into the brightening eastern sky, their speed a blur against the horizon. He adjusted his throttle, pushing his Werger to maintain speed, his wingman Lieutenant Hans Krebs, a fresh-faced 21-year-old with barely a dozen missions under his belt, tucked tightly to his left. The collective silence on the radio was absolute, an eerie quiet broken only by the rumble of hundreds of engines and the occasional creak of airframes flexing under the strain. As Rall's formation crossed the German border into Allied-controlled territory, the strange unease in his gut solidified. The clarity of the morning, the apparent ease of their advance, the static, vulnerable targets awaiting them, it all felt like a trap. The Phoenix document promised salvation, but Rall's seasoned instinct screamed of an impending, devastating conflagration. The grand ride of the Valkyries had begun, but its destination was not glory, but a meticulously planned inferno. The crisp, clear dawn of December 23, 1944, had been heralded as a blessing by the German High Command, a meteorological miracle opening a window for their audacious strike. But as the sun, a pale, anemic disk, began its ascent over the frozen Belgian landscape, it merely illuminated the meticulous geometry of a trap. At 6:21 a.m., the vanguard of Operation Walkürenritt, a formation of 54 Focke-Wulf FW-190s, broke from their treetop-level flight near Liège. Like a tightly coiled spring finally released, they began their ascent, climbing from mere meters above the snow-dusted fields to a planned attack altitude of 500 feet. Their target, Fuel Depot Charlie 7, marked with such damning precision on the captured map. For a fleeting moment as they gained altitude, the pilots saw nothing but the serene, icy expanse of the Belgian countryside. Then, as if triggered by an invisible signal, the sky exploded. Not with the expected anti-aircraft fire from a few scattered emplacements, but with an inferno. 236 Allied anti-aircraft guns, Bofors 40mm cannons, M190mm pieces, and the fearsome British QF 3.7-inch guns, unleashed a torrent of steel and fire. They had been positioned in a deadly box of death configuration 3 weeks prior, creating an interlocking cone of fire that churned the air with a density of 3,000 shells per minute. The flak was not sporadic, it was a solid wall of iron, an impenetrable storm of tracer rounds and high-explosive shells, all converging on the exact coordinates where the German pilots were just beginning their attack dive. Major Gunther Rall, at the head of his 3 Grupp, saw the hellish spectacle unfold before him. One moment the sky was clear. The next, it was choked with black and orange explosions crisscrossing lines of tracer fire, and the impossibly fast flashes of detonating shells. The sound reached him almost instantly, a deafening, tearing roar that vibrated through the airframe, a symphony of destruction unlike anything he had ever experienced. His pilot's instinct, honed by 275 victories, screamed an alarm louder than any flak. This was no fuel depot. This was an execution ground. Without conscious thought, Rall yanked his stick violently to the left, his FW-190 Werger almost ripping itself apart as it changed direction with a sickening lurch. His left wingtip, a blur of yellow, seemed to graze the frozen ground as he desperately tried to escape the impossible density of fire. He felt the sickening thud of impacts against his fuselage, the smell of cordite suddenly permeating his cockpit, but his machine held. He was out, just barely, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he glanced to his left. Lieutenant Hans Krebs, his young wingman, 21 years old, had not been quick enough. A volley of 40mm shells, each one a miniature explosive, tore into the engine of Krebs's FW-190. In the space of a single breath, the aircraft transformed from a sleek machine of war into a roaring, incandescent fireball. Debris, burning chunks of metal and flesh, exploded outwards as the fuselage disintegrated. Rall, through the haze of smoke and flak, saw a brief, impossible silhouette of Krebs's struggling form against the orange inferno before it vanished, swallowed by the cataclysm. Death had been instantaneous, absolute. The supposed strict radio silence, maintained with rigid discipline for the entire flight, shattered. It erupted into a cacophony of desperate German screams, Flak, Unmöglich, Wo werden abgeschlachtet, Ausweichen, Ausweichen. Cries of panic, terror, and disbelieving agony, each one a stark, chilling testament to the scale of the massacre. In less than 45 seconds, 19 FW-190s had been vaporized, their wreckage raining down in burning fragments onto the pristine snow. Another 12, critically damaged, spun out of control, their pilots fighting futilely for survival before plummeting to earth, most to their fatal destruction. The first wave, decimated and scattered, turned tail, their concentrated formation disintegrating into a desperate, every man for himself scramble. But the operation was far from over. Miles to the north, near Maastricht, the second target, identified as Supply Base Delta II, was proving equally catastrophic. Here, the vanguard consisted of the precious Me-262 jets, their pilots, among the most skilled in the Luftwaffe, flying with the arrogant confidence born of their superior speed. Oberleutnant Franz Schall, a 29-year-old veteran with a growing list of jet victories, led his formation, his futuristic twin-engine fighter cutting through the cold air at over 700 kilometers per hour. He saw the same horrifying eruption of flak, but his speed, they believed, would carry them through. It did not. The anti-aircraft batteries around Maastricht were equally numerous, equally prepared, and equally deadly. As the Me-262 screamed into the target area, they dove into a concentrated curtain of fire that shredded their sleek airframes. The jets, designed for speed and altitude, were devastatingly vulnerable to direct hits at low levels. In less than 2 minutes, 9 of the 23 Me-262's, irreplaceable assets, were obliterated. Schall himself felt a jarring impact, then another as his fuselage was riddled with fragments. The cockpit filled with the stench of ozone and burning insulation, warning lights flashing madly. His controls went sluggish, unresponsive. His sophisticated machine was dying beneath him. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, Shaw wrestled his crippled jet out of the immediate kill zone. He knew the machine was lost, riddled with holes, its engine sputtering. Over enemy territory, a terrible decision had to be made. With a heavy heart, he pulled the ejection handle. The canopy blew off, a violent rush of freezing air tore at him, and then the explosive charge beneath his seat sent him rocketing skyward. He watched, horrified, as his Me-262, one of the most advanced war machines ever built, spiraled away, a plume of black smoke marking its descent. He would live, but the Luftwaffe had just lost another irreplaceable asset. As the morning wore on, the disaster compounded itself. Each coordinate on Major von Schroeder's map, hailed as a strategic goldmine, led not to vulnerable fuel depots, but to another deadly concentration of Allied anti-aircraft firepower. The third target, nestled near Spa, proved to be an even more brutal surprise. This location, falsely identified as Refueling Point Echo 9, was, in reality, a heavily fortified anti-aircraft test installation of the U.S. 3rd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Division. It boasted an experimental combination of heavy cannons and quad-mounted M2.50 caliber machine guns, designed to test the limits of aerial defense. As the remaining German aircraft, their formations broken and discipline fraying, limped into the target area, the sky transformed into a tempest of scorching metal. 41 German planes, caught in the experimental kill zone, were summarily blown from the sky. The horrifying realization dawned upon the surviving German pilots with a sickening certainty. This was no fortunate strike, no tactical surprise. This was a meticulously planned ambush, a colossal trap. The Phoenix document was a lie. The radio, which should have been silent, was now a cacophony of panicked German voices, a desperate plea for orders, for escape, for any semblance of a plan. Commanders tried to issue orders to abort the mission, but it was too late. Many of the surviving aircraft were already too deep in Allied territory, their fuel gauges dangerously low, their engines starved from the long low-level flight. Their only choices were to press on into the inferno or attempt emergency landings behind enemy lines, most of which would prove fatal. Adding to the utter chaos, the Allied air forces, alerted by ultra-intercepts of the German operation, began to converge. From nearby airfields, Royal Canadian Air Force Spitfires of the 401st Squadron and U.S. 56th Fighter Group P-47 Thunderbolts, powerful and heavily armed, rose to meet the disoriented German formations. They fell upon the scattered, fuel-starved Luftwaffe planes with ruthless efficiency, picking off stragglers and damaged aircraft with practiced ease. The sky above Belgium, once a canvas for a hopeful German offensive, became a graveyard for their air force. Among the jet pioneers who had taken to the skies that morning was Major Wolfgang Spate, 30 years old, a visionary in jet combat tactics with 39 confirmed victories. His Me-262, already a rare and prized asset, was one of the few to make it past the initial flak barrages, only to be caught in the merciless crossfire over Verviers. A direct hit tore through his cockpit, and his revolutionary aircraft, like so many others, disintegrated in a flash of fire and smoke. Spate, a symbol of the Luftwaffe's fleeting technological superiority, was gone, erased by a single perfectly aimed shell. By 9:15 a.m., less than 3.5 hours after the first aircraft had taken off, Operation Walkürenritt had dissolved into complete and utter catastrophe. The promise of salvation had morphed into an unparalleled aerial slaughter. The Phoenix document, intended to ignite a resurgence, had instead engineered the Luftwaffe's fiery immolation, sealing the fate of hundreds of men and the last vestiges of German air power on the Western Front. By 9:15 a.m. on December 23, 1944, the cacophony of panicked radio calls, the desperate bursts of machine gun fire, and the roar of exploding aircraft had largely subsided. The brilliant, clear morning sky over Belgium, which had promised so much to the Luftwaffe, was now scarred with trails of black smoke and dotted with the grim, still forms of falling wreckage. Operation Walkürenritt, a grand, desperate gamble conceived in false hope, had crashed and burned spectacularly and utterly, in less than 3.5 hours. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the weight of unimaginable loss. The scale of the catastrophe was staggering. Back in Altenkirchen, the initial reports filtering back to Major Klaus von Schroeder were fragmentary, chaotic, and almost incomprehensible in their grim totality. But as the full picture slowly, horrifically, emerged from the scattered survivors and shell-shocked ground crews, the truth was laid bare. 209 German aircraft, representing approximately 18% of the Luftwaffe's entire operational fighter strength in the West, had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Of the hundreds who had taken off with such high hopes, 163 pilots were dead, their dreams and lives extinguished in the crucible of Allied flak. Another 56 had been captured, their fate now in enemy hands, and dozens more were wounded, their bodies shattered, their spirits broken. The airfields that morning had been bustling with the roar of 347 engines. Now, almost two-thirds of that force was gone. The Allied losses, in stark and brutal contrast, were negligible. A mere 3 aircraft had been lost in aerial combat, a testament to the disorientation and disarray of the surviving German formations. Casualties within the anti-aircraft batteries were practically non-existent. The Allied gunners, having been given precise warnings and operational parameters, had functioned with chilling efficiency, their positions carefully dug in and camouflaged. They had faced an enemy flying directly into a pre-sighted, overwhelming torrent of fire, an enemy whose every move had been anticipated. This unparalleled success was, of course, no accident. It was the direct result of the unseen war, the shadow conflict waged in secure rooms and through coded intercepts. British intelligence at Bletchley Park, the nerve center of the ultra-decryption effort, had been monitoring Luftwaffe communications in near real time since the moment the captured map began its journey up the German chain of command. Every frantic radio message, every coded operational directive discussing the valuable map captured near Aachen had been intercepted, decrypted, and analyzed with lightning speed. This intelligence stream, flowing directly from Bletchley Park to the London controlling section and the Allied command in the field, had provided an unprecedented level of foresight. It allowed for final, crucial adjustments to the anti-aircraft positions, ensuring that every gun was perfectly sighted, every kill zone optimized for maximum lethality. The ground crews and gunners knew precisely when and where the German attack waves would arrive, turning the audacious ride of the Valkyries into a meticulously planned ambush. The clear skies of December 23, hailed as a gift by Göring, were in fact a final, cruel flourish of the Allied deception, removing the last potential shield for the unsuspecting German pilots. The immediate losses, though horrific, were only the beginning of Operation Walkürenritt's devastating consequences. The Luftwaffe had not just lost aircraft, it had lost an irreplaceable generation of veteran pilots. These were men like Major Wolfgang Spate, the brilliant jet pioneer, and countless experienced squadron leaders and wingmen whose accumulated combat knowledge and leadership could not be replaced. At a time when Germany was already struggling desperately to train replacement crews, many of whom lacked even basic flight experience, the decimation of its seasoned aviators was a death blow to its operational capability. The future of German air power, already bleak, now appeared terminal. Furthermore, the colossal expenditure of fuel for the operation, combined with the fuel lost in the destroyed aircraft, created an immediate and crippling supply crisis. 10% of Germany's total aviation fuel reserves in the West, gambled and lost in a few short hours, meant that subsequent German air operations would be severely limited for weeks, perhaps months. Tanks on the ground would run dry, supply lines would be vulnerable, and the very offensive the Luftwaffe was supposed to protect would be left exposed and unsupported. Perhaps most devastating of all, the confidence of the Luftwaffe in its own intelligence apparatus was shattered beyond repair. The Phoenix document, once hailed as a miracle, was now revealed as the most treacherous of deceptions. Commanders like Major Gunther Röhl, who had felt that gnawing unease before takeoff, now wrestled with a profound sense of betrayal and a creeping paranoia. In the months that followed, German military leaders became increasingly suspicious of all Allied intelligence, even genuine reports. This paralysis in decision-making, this inherent distrust, often led to inaction and hesitation at critical moments, further eroding Germany's ability to wage war effectively. The seed of doubt planted by Quicksilver II blossomed into a pervasive, crippling paranoia. The Ardennes offensive itself, already doomed by its unsustainable logistics and the improving weather that quickly restored Allied air supremacy, now found its already limited air support completely vanished. As Panzer tanks famously stalled on Belgian roads, out of fuel, and American troops regrouped and counterattacked, the deafening absence of the Luftwaffe became painfully evident. Operation Bodenplatte, the major air attack planned for New Year's Day 1945, had to be executed with a drastically reduced force and far less experienced pilots, leading to another costly disaster that cemented Germany's aerial impotence in the final months of the war. Decades later, a much older Major Klaus von Schroeder, a survivor of the war, would often recall that fateful morning with a bitter, haunted clarity. The image of the mud-stained leather folder, the captured map spread across his desk, remained vivid in his memory. In that moment in December, he would recount, his voice raspy with age and regret, when I opened that folder, I thought I had found our salvation. In reality, I had held our epitaph. Today, the very map he clutched so eagerly, its carefully falsified coordinates still visible, is preserved in the archives of the Imperial War Museum in London. It lies there, a silent, chilling testament to the invisible war of deception, a war waged not with bombs and bullets, but with lies and carefully cultivated illusions. Operation Quicksilver II had demonstrated with horrifying clarity that in modern warfare, information could be weaponized as lethally as any artillery piece. It proved that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from hiding the truth, but from making the enemy believe in a meticulously constructed, devastating lie, ensuring their destruction by their own eager hand. As the echoes of Operation Walkürenritt faded into the frigid air of December 1944, what remained was not the glorious victory the Luftwaffe had desperately sought, but a landscape scarred by wreckage and a command structure reeling from an unprecedented, self-inflicted wound. The dream of salvation, woven from the threads of a single deceptive map, had dissolved into a nightmare of shattered aircraft and lost lives. Major Klaus von Schroeder, haunted by the specter of his discovery, would forever carry the burden of its true legacy. The Ardennes offensive, stripped of its aerial shield, limped towards its inevitable collapse, a stark reminder that even the most formidable military machine could be brought to its knees by the subtle, insidious power of a well-placed lie. This saga of Operation Quicksilver II is a chilling testament to the unseen battles that rage beneath the surface of armed conflict. It reveals a truth often overlooked in the annals of war, that the mind, when manipulated, can be as potent a weapon as any bomb or bullet. The greatest victories are not always forged in open combat, but in the clandestine chambers of deception, where belief itself becomes the battlefield, and truth a casualty of strategy. The ghost of a false promise, once embraced, can lead an entire force to its doom. What do you think was the most critical moment that sealed the fate of the Luftwaffe in this intricate dance of shadows and light? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. For more untold stories from the hidden files of World War II, where history's most cunning deceptions and brutal truths are brought to light, be sure to watch our next video. If these tales from the depths of history captivate your imagination, please consider liking this video and subscribing to WWII Hidden Files. Your support allows us to continue unearthing these vital, often overlooked chapters of our past.